yoga felt so good that I felt like I wasn't deserving of it. Yoga isn't just stretching. You name the reasons why people don't do yoga, I have heard it all. I don't need you to touch your toes. I need you to show up as you are. Once you drop in, man, the magic happens. Everyone's really feeling it. Like everyone's feeling, that itchy throat, a little bit ill, a little bit off balance. And I particularly find that winter time is one of the hardest times to really start and get fluid movement in our body. And so today I'm going to be sharing with you why I believe that yoga is for everyone. We all have a place in yoga. In fact, everything we do is yoga. And I will also share with you a couple of my kind of personal experiences and how that then also ties back to stress and helping you live a greater life of clarity, calm, and balance. Welcome to Resonance, a podcast for ambitious, heart-led humans craving more balance, depth, and aliveness in their lives. I'm your host, Vic, health coach, yoga teacher, facilitator, and fellow high achiever, learning to live in tune with my nervous system, not against it. And this space is here to remind you that you can have it all. The career, the success, the fulfillment, all aligned with your truth. Through honest conversations, expert insights, and practical tools, we'll explore how to work with your body, mind, emotions, and spirit, not against them. And the best part? You don't have to stay stuck in survival mode to get there. Because true well-being is not about being perfect. It's about being in resonance. Let's dive in. So let's dive into yoga. I would really love to just have you contemplate for a moment, what you think yoga means, right? Like if you had to pick one word to define yoga, what would that mean to you? And chances are many of you will think, well, it's movement, stretching, flexibility on the mat, Lululemon pants. You kind of got to be blonde, tall, and flexible to be in a class. Nah, not really, actually. I'm really here to prove why yoga is for everybody. And what inspired today's topic is I literally just got back a couple hours ago from teaching a yoga class to a group of complete beginners. Like a few of them may have dabbled in it here and there, but most of them were brand spanking new. It was at their, like the equivalent of a CrossFit studio basically. And it was part of their little 8-week challenge. So, you've got these kind of really active, really buff people trying out yoga for the first time. And the shift that I saw between when they first arrived in the room and, there was like a lot of chitter chatter and nervousness and I guess maybe a bit of prejudice to then when they walked out at the end of our hour together and just like how grounded and calm and like surprised everyone was at the multifaceted effect that yoga can have on one's not just physical body, but also mind, energy, and emotional body was just amazing. That's literally part of yoga, breathing, all right? How many times do we actually get the chance to slow down and really take that deep breath in all the way to the base of our spine and to the belly? And then let it all go. It feels so good, even if it's just one breath. Imagine like an hour of connected movement. So, look, I really believe that yoga is for everybody on many different reasons, and I'll kind of share the non-physical pieces in a moment, but I just wanted to tie it back to what resonance is all about and what we speak about here, which is stress, right? Like overwhelm, overwork, burnout. These are all derivatives of stress and an overstimulated nervous system. And yoga really helps us regulate our nervous system. It helps us come back into resonance. And particularly certain styles of yoga are really good at activating the parasympathetic nervous system, which if you've been following along, you will know that is our rest and digest mode. That is when literally our belly can start to digest the food in our body. We start to slow down the heart rate, slow down the breathing, and just feel calmer and better. So this is kind of my headline as to why I think yoga is for everybody, is it regulates your nervous system. It helps you come into resonance. So it's only appropriate that I'm talking about it here right now. However, what most people don't know is that asana, which is the Sanskrit word for the movement part of the yoga, is only one part of like this multifaceted aspect of yoga. So I guess if you were to find someone who's just done like their first 200-hour teacher training, you know, it's like the basic one-on-one 101 course that someone does, when you ask them what is yoga, they will probably tell you that it means to yoke, i.e. to unite. And yes, that is true. It's sort of, yoga stands for union of mind, body, energy, emotion, spirit, just connectedness, wholeness, all of us, all in one. And the ancient yogis, you know, I mean, we could go and totally nerd out, but we might save that for another episode. Like the movement part was just one part of yoga, one part of connecting to themselves. There's so much more, you know, there's meditation, there is withdrawal of the senses, there's things like not being wasteful or like treating others with reverence. I mean, it goes on to so many fundamental values that I believe are underlying what it is to be a good human being. And that is yoga to me. So I feel that yoga isn't just on the mat. It's a lot of it is how you are in the world. It is your way of being, and your practice doesn't end on the mat. Like when you come out of your shavasana, which is the final pose, that meditative pose, that's it, not it. Like, okay, cool, yoga's done. I'm like back to my crazy life. Like, look, unfortunately, that is the case for many people. However, if and when you start to practice yoga more frequently, you develop that ability to be grounded and be present in your day-to-day life. Like, this is why I weave so much of this into my practice. Like, if any of you have ever been to my classes or are some of my private one-on-one clients, you'll know that I tend to weave in what we experience in the day-to-day into our practice. So coming back home to ourselves, grounding to ourselves. It's like, even if the movement might have gotten us a little bit sweaty or a little bit off balance and wobbly, just like life gets us worked up and off balance, right? Like, how do we come home to ourselves? How do we find our center again and are grounded again? So I think it's a beautiful practice, not just for the physical body, but also for your mind, for your resilience, for your awareness, to develop your consciousness. And I just want to touch on the prejudice, you know, against yoga. So I've heard it all. I mean, you name the reasons why people don't do yoga, I have heard it all. I'm just taking a little deep breath myself because I tend to get really worked up and excited about these things. So when I was teaching this morning is the perfect example. The studio owner who kind of organized the class, I was like, oh, are you going to join us? And he's like, no, yoga's not really my thing. And I kind of totally accept that and totally respect it, you know, because as I'll share in another episode, I do believe that certain types of movement are suited to us individually. We are all so unique. So like, if yoga's not his jam, that's fine, right? But what really actually was the core inspiration of this episode was then at the end of practice, when we had our little chat and little debrief, he shared like, oh, yeah, I didn't realize that's what that was going to be like. I actually think that would have been really good for me, and I'll definitely be joining next time. And that to me was like such an affirmation of the fact that yoga is for everybody, and B, the fact that there's so much prejudice against yoga, right? Like, one of the guys that walked into class this morning was like, oh, there's no way I can touch my toes. I'm like, cool, perfect. I don't need you to touch your toes. I need you to show up as you are. And there's another colleague at my day job who talks about yoga and says she can't do it because she gets too stressed out by the breathing, which I find really interesting. And yes, as a yoga teacher, the whole, one of the aspects of yoga is to bring breath and movement into a bit of coherence. But really, the most important part of why we bring breath into the practice is actually to bring your awareness to the breath, to show you how you can cultivate your breath, to create more spaciousness in the body, or to lengthen through the spine, to move, to notice how it feels to move with your breath, and let that be a vehicle for you to enjoy the practice. And yet where this colleague of mine is seeing it as like really strict instructions of, now you need to inhale and exhale and inhale and exhale. And I see that, right? Like, I've been to many different yoga classes as well where the teachers are like really mechanical, and I'm like, okay, it just shows kind of the judgments that are there. And I think we all judge. We always have some kind of preconceived idea or belief of things that we maybe haven't experienced for ourselves, be it from social media or from what we've heard from other people or seen on movies, etc. So I just really want you to be aware of any judgments that you may have, especially if you're a beginner or have never practiced yoga yourself, of what they are and why that might be holding you back. Especially like the one that always just kind of is one of my little pet peeves. And I've been there for a long time, right? Like I'll share a little bit of like how I got into yoga in a moment. But when we're on the mat, and I experienced this when I just started practicing, you're like looking at everyone else, right? It's like, oh my God, how do I look? Like even this morning, the ladies were like, oh, I want to be on the back. I don't want people looking at my butt. And I'm just like, no one cares about your butt. Everyone's going to be thinking the exact same thing, because that's what we do as humans. We're just in our head all the time. And part of yoga is starting to bring you out of that inner chitter chatter that is just nonstop, and actually bringing some more resonance, some more alignment in your body, mind, energy, emotions, and spirit. So if you think like, oh no, there's no way I could come because people will judge me, and I'm going to look this way or the other, and rah, like, look, first of all, if it makes you feel any better, probably most of the people in the room, unless they're seasoned practitioners, are also having those exact same thoughts. So if everyone's busy worrying about how they look and what others think of them, then they don't have time to worry about how everyone else looks, right? Like, do you see the contradiction here? I mean, I just think that's so funny. And it wasn't until I really started noticing it for myself, and once I became more aware of it, I was able to drop more into the practice. And then once you drop in, man, the magic happens. So what is the magic in yoga? The magic is the connection that you get to yourself. I mean, I have been practicing yoga since technically when I was about like 8 or 9 years old. That was the first time I experienced yoga. We had it. I was blessed enough in my school to have that available as an elective, and that's what I felt called to take. And I mean, I still think of my yoga teacher to this day. She was an incredible teacher and mentor and counselor at school. And to this day, I will never forget when she said, it's, I guess, like a really yogic phrase, but it applies to all of life. She said, change is the only constant in our lives. And that sentence, for some reason, has stuck with me like throughout my entire life. And sometimes I didn't know why. I didn't realize that I would be, a yoga teacher later down the track. I didn't realize I'd be like such a fan and talking about yoga on my podcast. But she really sparked that initial excitement in me. However, then it took me quite a while in my life to give myself quote unquote permission to practice yoga. You see, I had such a damaging relationship with myself, and there was a lot of negative self-talk and a lot of productivity shame and guilt, and just a lot to unpack there, years and years of therapy worth, yoga felt so good that I felt like I wasn't deserving of it. I felt like I wasn't allowed to feel that good. So I didn't practice, and I didn't practice for a really long time. I remember we had a teacher in uni. It was actually a fellow student, but she was also a yogi. And I went to a few of her classes. It was like an absolute highlight. But other than that, many years, I was always quite really into movement, whether it was like the gym or running or whatever else. But for some reason, even though I loved it so much, I just didn't give myself that permission to practice yoga. And it wasn't until after I ran my second marathon and I just felt in my body the constriction and the kind of just, my body was yearning for some kind of mobility practice. And I always stretched after running or after going to the gym. That was always part of my routine. But yoga's different. You see, yoga isn't just stretching. In fact, I would argue that yoga actually does a bigger role in improving your mobility, improving your balance, improving your stability. It also improves your strength, again, depending on the type of yoga that you practice. But it really sets you up for life. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in another episode. But I believe, and kind of what I've been taught by even some of my anatomy teachers, is that we need movement in 3 key pillars of types of movement that are out there so that we really stay healthy and can support our longevity. And that is a kind of heart-based movement, so cardiovascular. It doesn't have to be super intense, right? Even going for a walk is technically cardiovascular activity. Then we need strength. So whether you like to hear this or not, yes, you probably do need some kind of weight-bearing movement in your day-to-day practice, especially if you are older and aging, especially if you are a woman that's either perimenopausal or going through menopause. I cannot stress how important it is for you to continue to build your muscles, because we lose muscle mass and we lose water as we age, and we need these muscles to protect our bones and ligaments and to keep us mobile. And this is where the third area comes in, is mobility, right? So what do I mean with mobility? It is our way to move our body freely. Yes, flexibility is a part of that, but there's also an element of your joints and your balance, and mobility is being able to get up without cracking your back, or kind of throwing your back out. Or for example, we do balancing practices in yoga. Why do we do that? Well, you build stability and mobility in your ankle, which means that if you're out on a Friday night wearing heels and you stumble on the pavement, chances are you're going to be able to catch yourself rather than tear a ligament or something and be completely out of action for a few weeks. So I really feel that now, if we kind of get into the 3D physical plane, yoga has a really important role to play, and it blends all of these into one. So I will, leave you with just a brief overview of the different kinds of yoga that are out there, and know that this is not an exhaustive list. There's so much available. And I hope that from me sharing this, you will start to see how, yes, yoga actually is for everybody. And so I'll just decipher some of the names for you. So I think in Western society, one of the most common types of yoga that you will find is called vinyasa yoga, or it's also known as flow yoga. So that's what vinyasa stands for. It's flow yoga. It is quite, as the name suggests, a flowing kind of movement. So a lot of repetitive sequencing. For example, a handful of sun salutations. There's generally like an open hip and a closed hip sequence, some balance, some core, bit of back bending, and then you're closing. That's kind of your yoga one-on-one class. If there was, I guess, like the average kind of yoga, that's what I tend to see most out there. And I will say that now, especially as this gains more and more popularity, I do notice different kinds of vinyasa. So if you see like a dynamic flow or vinyasa class on a gym schedule, then that means that the movement's probably going to be a little bit more intense in the way of its frequency and speed. You'll probably get a good sweat, versus if it's just like a standard vinyasa or a flow class, like, yeah, you will still get a good workout. And at the same time, it's more beginner friendly. So the class I taught this morning, as an example, was a very beginner friendly vinyasa yoga class. Some of the other names you may hear out there, and I'm just kind of picking and choosing a couple that are most popular, I guess, that you'll probably see. There's also Hatha yoga. Hatha yoga is a really traditional style of yoga where you actually hold the poses for much longer, rather than kind of flowing and moving through them through specific sequencing. It's more about the posture, if that makes sense. I personally am not as experienced in Hatha yoga. I'm not trained in it, so that's kind of as much as I can share, but it is also a very beginner-friendly class. Iyengar yoga, which isn't as popular, but it is out there. So that is like really focused on posture and alignment. And by the way, I'm going to make a side note and like come back to that, because I do have something else to share when it comes to posture and what yoga looks like. But in Iyengar, you're probably going to use a lot of props, spend a lot of time getting into the shape and really staying there. I haven't actually experienced this class for myself, so it's still on my bucket list. But in case you were wondering, that's what that is. Ashtanga yoga is also a really, I guess, strict sequence-based class. So Ashtanga yoga is probably one of the more masculine types of yoga classes you could go to. And I don't mean that in the sense of that, like, you'll see more guys than women there. What I mean is that it's more active, it's harder, it's generally a little bit more on the advanced scale, and the shapes are a really specific sequence. I'm pretty sure they're like the exact same sequence from start to finish for most Ashtanga classes. I stand to be corrected, because again, this is one I haven't experienced myself, because I tend to lean more to the yin side of yoga, but that is effectively what that is. There are beginner Ashtanga yoga classes out there. I would just really suggest looking for a beginner friendly one rather than just going to a standard Ashtanga class, because from what I've heard is that it can be quite intense. Hot yoga, that's a controversial one. I guess hot yoga, or it was previously known as Bikram yoga, but then there was like a big scandal with Bikram, who was the, I guess, man who came up with this specific sequence and used to teach it and teach practitioners. It is also a really specific set of, I think it's like 20 yoga postures in a ridiculously hot room. And it really, I think, tests your mind and body. So again, not one I have tried, because that one's also more on the masculine side. But if that's something that tickles your fancy, that might be something to look into. Some other ones. So I actually teach yin yoga as well. So yin yoga, you may have heard me refer to kind of the masculine side of yoga. Yin is more the feminine side of yoga. So if you think like yin and yang being polar opposites, like your Ashtanga, your hot yoga would be your yang, and yin is yin yoga. So my goodness, I love yin yoga. In an hour class, you'd maybe do like a maximum of 6 shapes, and you use a lot of props to get really into kind of the fullest, most comfortable expression of the shape. There are many, many kind of varieties and options available to all body shapes, sizes, mobility, availability, pregnancies. I mean, I find yin yoga is the best way to get started with yoga if you're curious about it, because it is the most soothing, the most beginner friendly class you will find out there. I will also say that with a side note that it will test you mentally, because what yin yoga does is, through the longer holds, like you would hold a shape anywhere from, in an average class, probably 1 to 5 minutes. And what happens is, as you hold that shape, the fascia, which is the kind of crystalline water-like structure that runs in and around and through, penetrating through your muscles, it is literally what holds us like upright. Like if we had no fascia, we would just kind of deflate and just be this little blob on the floor. So what happens to your fascia when you hold these shapes for a little bit longer is that you start to release any little knots or constrictions or tension that might be there, and you start to get more and more flexibility become available to the tissues of your body. And it's a really passive way to do that. So I generally find that in yin yoga, I can get much deeper in my shapes than, say, if I was just going through a normal class. And it's also really, really soothing and restorative for the nervous system, because between each shape you come into rebounds, which is a neutral shape to let your fascia, the tissues of your body, rehydrate. Like if you think about a sponge, right? And like when you come into a shape, you're basically like squeezing all the water out of the sponge. That's basically what you're doing to your body when you're coming into the shape. And then when you come and lay down in a neutral position, it's like the sponge can it can breathe again, and it can soak up all the water and rehydrate and kind of get back into its plumpness. So yin yoga is one of my personal favorites. That's probably what I enjoy teaching the most, and also enjoy practicing quite a lot. There's also a couple other types of yoga that I just wanted to mention. So yoga nidra, I also teach. It is it translates to conscious and aware sleep. So it's effectively a way of getting into your fourth state of awareness, which we don't often speak to because we're mostly aware of our waking state, our kind of lucid dreaming state, and our dream state. But there is also our fourth state, which is in kind of Sanskrit referred to as turiya, which is often in the Western world referred to as like the bliss field, or effectively samadhi. I mean, there's so many different words for it. Effectively, think of it as your body is asleep, your mind is asleep, but your consciousness is still aware. So you're still aware of what's happening around you. You are still aware of the guidance that is being led, yet your body and mind are able to restore and relax so deeply. It is so incredibly restorative. Like if you actually drop into yoga nidra in your practice, 15 minutes of yoga nidra can give you the equivalent amount of about 1 to 1.5 hours of sleep worth of rest. Like it is really, really powerful. I love yoga nidra. I actually practice it every day at lunchtime, pretty much most days. And other couple types of yoga. I mean, meditation is yoga as well, but I could go down a whole deep rabbit hole. I'm just going to stick it to kind of like normal classes you may see, because that's just like a whole subgroup of yoga, and you could go down many, many, many different paths. It's like choose your flavor. And then here's a fun one that I'll leave you with: aerial yoga. That was something that I really enjoyed practicing for a long time. So aerial yoga is yoga with the support of a hammock, which is secured to the ceiling with like professional carabiners and etc. It's like, it's really safe. Don't worry, you're not going to fall. I love aerial yoga mostly for the inversion, because what you can do is you can go upside down, be fully supported by the hammock, and that inversion is incredibly, just feels fantastic, because you release the spine in ways that we just can't do when we're always upright and kind of, have gravity pulling us down, because we're effectively flipping everything on its head, right? It's also incredibly beneficial for your circulation because it gets your blood really moving. And then as you move through, I mean, it's not like you just spend an hour upside down. It's probably like, a couple breaths maximum, especially if you're a beginner. But as you move through aerial yoga, with the support of the hammock, you get access to shapes in much deeper and different ways than perhaps you can if you don't have one. I don't know if that really makes sense. I highly recommend trying it out. It's so much fun. And there's all different kinds of aerial yoga as well. So that's one on my bucket list to train in and maybe have at my future retreat venue at some point. So, but one step at a time. So that is a little overview of kind of different types of yoga. And these are just the most popular ones, right? So I hope by now you understand why yoga is for everybody. Like, you can find what works for you. And let me tell you the most important and most important thing. Every teacher is unique and different. So just because you had a bad experience with a teacher or a specific practice, please, I beg you, don't rule it out, right? Like, I have had bad experiences with teachers all the time. Like, I went to one just the other week where literally I came out of the class feeling like, oh God, if like I was brand new to yoga, this would probably really turn me off. So I just wanted to name this because, we're all human, and I'm sure that when you're ready and when you start looking, you will find the teacher out there. I am contemplating perhaps offering some online yoga classes as well. I don't know yet if that is something that you would be interested in. Please send me a DM on Instagram. I would love to kind of hear your thoughts, because it is something that's been kind of percolating through my mind. But either way, even if it's not me, right? Like, if I'm not your person, someone out there is. And just because one class that you tried and went to maybe didn't quite vibe doesn't necessarily mean that it won't be, you won't find your person. I think they definitely are out there. I personally now these days actually go for the teacher, not for the class. So there are like specific teachers that I gravitate towards, and from each different teacher I receive different things. Like, there's a teacher who I really love to play with like inversions with, and like she taught me how to do arm balances, and so like I know when I go to her classes I can do a lot of kind of more funky stuff, more advanced stuff, because she holds that space really gracefully. And then there's another teacher who really weaves in the native New Zealand Maori practices into her teachings. And she teaches to the Maramataka, which is the Maori calendar system. And she also is just like, she grew up in a yoga community. So she has so much wisdom. Like, every shape has a story. Every shape has a breath practice with it. Like, oh my God, I just love her classes. She's probably like by far one of my favorites. Eridani, if you're in Auckland, check her out. She's amazing. There's other teachers that I come to when I need some nurturing. So there's a yoga teacher who I really love doing yin with, who like he's a man, and his voice, just like the baritone, soft, soothing voice, I'm like, feel like cradled and held and just like I can really let go. Like I really love doing yin yoga with this teacher. Or there's another one that's like teaches really anatomically and really with alignment. So oh my goodness, like there's just so much out there, right? Like I really hope that if anything, like this episode maybe inspired you to reframe your thinking about yoga and understand that it is for everybody. And this is that final note that I will leave you with that came to me as I was sharing the different types of yoga with you. It is posture, right? So many people avoid yoga because they think, oh, well, I don't look like the girls on Instagram. I'm not flexible. I can't move like this. It doesn't matter. Like, posture-based yoga, or what we call it in the community aesthetic yoga, I personally find is actually quite toxic. I have been taught, and I know most of the teachers here in Auckland, and I'm sure they exist around the world as well, teach functionally. What does that mean? Functional yoga means meeting your body where it is. Like, I understand the way my anatomy teacher taught me is that depending on our bone structure and the way our body is built, that one shape will be really easily available for one person and completely impossible for another. Or it will feel really good on one body and horrible on another. Or it's one side will be different to the other. Like, we are so unique. So please, if this is what's been holding you back, please stop worrying about what you look like, because we all actually look different. Like, one yoga pose, especially in my yin practice where like people really drop into what feels good, you will look around the room and you will see that same shape, 20 different people, 20 different variations of that shape, because we are so unique and we are so special. So I guess that's what I've got to leave you with. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I mean, clearly I'm very passionate about yoga. I could nerd about it for days. It's definitely not the last time that you will be hearing me speak about it. But in the meantime, I would just love to hear from you. You know, like, what is your personal opinion about yoga? Which maybe of the types of practices that I mentioned speak more to you, right? Like, are you more intrigued by the slower, the soothing types of practices, or are you actually more like turned on by the movement and the more masculine, the hot, you know? Like, tell me, DM me. I would really love to chat and hear your thoughts, because I think that if everyone in the world practiced yoga, we would have a very kind, very loving and very wholesome world to live in. So I genuinely believe yoga is for everybody. I hope that you do now as well. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next time. Bye for now. If the word mindfulness has ever felt vague, overwhelming, or just a little out of reach, I created something just for you. Live in Presence. 8 days of mindfulness is my free online course that gently walks you through everything I wish I had known when I first heard the word mindfulness. It is a soft, spacious introduction to presence. There's no jargon, no overwhelm, and no pressure to do it right, quote unquote. So over 8 days, you'll receive short, grounded lessons and simple practices that you can weave into your real life, even if you are busy, tired, or feeling totally out of sync. And the link is in the show notes below, or through the link in my bios at Levenberg. Because presence isn't something you have to earn. It's something you get to return to. The views and opinions expressed by guests on Resonance are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of me, Viktoria Levenberg, Live in Health, or anyone working within the Live in Health brand. This space welcomes a diversity of ideas, experiences, and stories, and part of Resonance is learning to take what aligns and gently leaving the rest. Also, while I am a national board certified health and wellness coach and deeply passionate about well-being, this podcast is intended for educational and inspirational purposes only. Resonance does not substitute personalized medical, psychological, or therapeutic advice. Always seek guidance from qualified professionals for any physical, emotional, or mental health concerns.